How can I get a U.S. green card, a permanent resident card? That is one of the most common questions that I get on a daily basis working as an immigration lawyer in the United States. This video is going to go through your options of steps that you can take to get yourself that U.S. green card. Hi, and thank you for joining me to talk immigration. My name is Andrea Shev, and I'm the managing attorney of Shev Law Group in Los Angeles, California. I've been doing immigration law for almost 20 years now, and I've put together tons of videos for you to give you clear, concise, and easy to understand information on all types of immigration topics. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to thumbs it up, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're notified every time a video comes out. And make sure that you go to my social media. Go to Instagram, go to Facebook, and like it and subscribe to it. And then you can get more information from me more on a daily basis. The YouTube videos I use for more in-depth information about topics. But I go to Instagram and I go to Facebook and I give you tidbits of things that are happening on a daily basis in the world of immigration. And also it gives you a chance to get to know me better. So if we work together in the future, you know who I am. Now let's get to this topic of how to get a U.S. green card. Okay, the first order of business is to get yourself an approved I-130 petition or I-140 petition. Now there's two ways of getting green cards in the U.S., or the most common two ways of getting green cards in the U.S. It's either through a sponsorship through a family member, a U.S. citizen spouse, brother, sister, parent, or child. And the other way is through employment. And that's when an employer petitioner, petitions on your behalf to get you your green card. But that is just the first step. Once those are approved, once those people or those companies petition you to get your green card, you have to take the more important step and get yourself the actual green card. So it's a two-step process. One is to be petitioned, get the approval of the petition, and then the second step is actually asking the government for the actual green card. And that's what you have to do. Now, there's two ways of doing it. You can either do it inside the United States with something called adjustment of status, or you can do it outside the United States, something called consular processing. Now, when you file those petitions, or I should say your petitioners file, either your spouse, your mother, your brother, your employer, they have to designate what you're going to do. Are you going to do it inside the United States for adjustment of status, or are you going to do it outside the United States for consular processing? That has to be decided at that stage. So it's really important that you watch this video to decide which way do you want to do the process. Make sure you wait to the end of this video for a very, very, very important tip that you will want to know if you're going through this process and you have to choose between adjustment of status or consular processing. Don't miss it. Okay, let's start with adjustment of status. Adjustment of status is done inside the United States by an application that you file with USCIS. You're asking them to change your status from non-immigrant, because you have to be here in some status, to immigrant. And that's what you're adjusting, non-immigrant to immigrant. And don't confuse that with a change of status, which is when you're in a non-immigrant status and you're going to another non-immigrant status. That's called a change of status. We want to do an adjustment of status. Now, there's a few things that you have to know about adjustment of status to make your decision of what you want to do, adjustment or consular. Adjustment, you have to be in status in order to adjust your status, except in one particular situation, which we'll get to in a second. But you have to be in a status in order to adjust to a status. So if you're in the United States and you're in a certain status, and you're willing to stay in that status for a prolonged period of time while your application is pending, adjustment of status might be your go-to. But if you're in a status and it's about to expire, or you don't want to stay here, or you want to travel, or you want to do something, then maybe adjustment of status is not the best option. Maybe you want to consider consular processing. Also, when you're doing an adjustment of status and you file that adjustment of status application, you cannot leave the United States until you get permission from the United States through a document called advance parole, or you will be considered to have abandoned your adjustment of status application. Now, there's a few exceptions to a couple different statuses that allow you to travel during the process, like an H-1B or an L. But most statuses, if you file and then you leave, you're going to have abandoned it and you have to start all over again. So adjustment of status requires you to be in status and inside the United States while the application is pending until immigration gives you the option of an advance parole document, which could take 4, 5, 6 months after you file to allow you to travel without abandoning your petition. Now, like I said, there's one exception to this. The exception is that you do not have to be in status if you're filing with an approved petition from a U.S. citizen spouse. So if you got married to a U.S. citizen spouse and that U.S. citizen spouse sponsored you for a green card and that was approved and you're filing adjustment under that application, then you do not need to be in status when you file. The same thing for a parent of a U.S. citizen. So if those are the two situations you're in, and let's say you were in status and now you're out of status, you can still file adjustment of status. And sometimes you have to file adjustment of status because if you leave, you're not going to be able to come back because you're probably out of status for a period of time that will stop you from being able to re-enter the United States. So that's very important. But one other key thing to keep in mind is if you are out of status, in order to qualify to file for adjustment of status because of a spouse or a parent, or a child, I should say, a U.S. citizen child, you have to have entered the United States on your last entry in a legal status. So for example, if I enter the country on a visitor visa and I'm here for 4 or 5 months and then my daughter, who's a U.S. citizen, wants to petition me to get my green card and she petitions me and it gets approved, I'm fine. Even if I fall out of status, I'm still able to file adjustment of status because I entered the country legally on that visitor visa. But if I did not enter the country legally, I cannot use adjustment of status. Okay? Next, filing as consular processing is a whole nother world than filing as adjustment of status. Consular processing takes the petition that you file and deals with it outside the United States. So it looks like this. Your spouse or your employer petitions, they get approved. You have the approved I-140 or I-130 for that relative petition or the employment petition. Now, because you've designated that you're going to do consular processing, USCIS then sends your file to the National Visa Center, the NVC. And the NVC then contacts you and says, okay, we see that you want to do this outside at a consulate abroad, so can you please send us XYZ documents? And basically the process starts for consular processing. But it's just that. You're processed at the consulate abroad. So what does that mean? That means that you don't have to be in the United States during the whole process. You don't even deal with USCIS during the process. Everything is done outside the United States. This allows you to have the freedom to travel in and out of the U.S. It allows you the freedom to stay outside the United States during the process. It allows you to come visit and then leave the United States during the process. There's no restrictions on travel if you choose consular processing. And that's very important for a lot of people because a lot of people have lives and have family and have jobs that are still outside the United States that they have to attend to while this process of getting their green card or their permanent resident card goes on. They can't afford being trapped inside the United States during the process. So consular processing is an option for people that want the flexibility to travel in and out of the U.S. and don't want to be confined somewhere while they're waiting for their application. Also, a lot of people that are filing for green cards out there, you guys, don't even have status in the United States. Like don't have a work visa, don't have anything. So how are you even going to get to the United States to do it? So you would do it through consular processing. The other thing with consular processing to keep in mind is that there's a few different processes that are different if you do consular processing versus adjustment of status. For example, with consular processing, if you're filing under a spousal petition, like a U.S. citizen spouse petition for you, you don't do an interview with your spouse. You do an interview by yourself at the consulate abroad. Where if you're filing adjustment of status, you'll do the interview together with your spouse in the United States. So that's a very big difference that a lot of people don't really think about when they're filing or they're choosing between adjustment of status or consular processing. The other thing you have to think about is the items that they're going to require. When you do it inside the United States under adjustment of status, they require you to do your fingerprints. But outside the United States, they require you to provide police records and different documents that maybe you wouldn't have to be required to give if you were doing adjustment of status. So there's different documents that will be required for consular processing or adjustment of status. There's two different agencies that control the two processes. So there's different processes and different things that are required by each agency when going through the process of getting your green card. It gets a little bit confusing, but that's why we're here to help you during the process if you work with us. So there's another thing that you need to consider, the difference between adjustment of status and consular processing, and that's the timing on getting the actual permanent resident card or the green card. If you do it through adjustment of status, you have your interview, or sometimes you won't even have an interview if you're doing it through employment or certain family relationships. But you get the green card in the mail, usually within 30 days or less, usually nowadays 2 weeks after you get approved for the petition. Now, if you do consular processing, you go to the interview abroad, then you get approved, and then you're issued something called an immigrant visa. It looks like a visa that they put in your passport, but it's an immigrant visa. It's good usually for a year, but sometimes less. But you must enter the United States to activate your permanent resident status within 6 months of that issuance. So you have to keep that in mind, because a lot of people don't realize that, and then they're sitting outside the country in their houses and they have businesses that they need to kind of wind up and get closed so they can head to the United States to start their new life as permanent residents in the United States, and they don't realize they only have 6 months. So just keep that in mind, that if you do it outside the United States by consular processing, you only have 6 months to enter the United States to activate that green card. Once you enter, then they will start processing the actual permanent resident card, and you should get it. Nowadays, who knows when we get it, but usually you get it within 4 months or so from entering the US. But you have that immigrant visa that allows you to travel and work and do whatever you can as any other permanent resident would, but you don't have the actual permanent resident card. So there's a lot of things to consider on both sides, adjustment of status and consular processing. And I know it's a lot of information to absorb, but I think I wanted to give you a really good basis of what is the true difference and what is the option that you have, consular processing or adjustment of status. Now here's a big tip, huge tip, and I hope you're still listening and you're still watching this video to hear this. The tip is that when you choose, because remember you have to choose which way you're going when the initial petition is filed by your employer or your family member. I suggest if you're not sure what you want to do, you choose the consular processing option, because it's much, much easier to change from consular processing to adjustment than from adjustment to consular processing. And that's a huge, huge, huge tip. So if you don't know which one you want to do, you want to choose the consular processing, because then if you change your mind and you decide to do adjustment, all you do is change and you send the petition to USCIS and it changes. If you do it the other way, it's a very long process, gets complicated, it costs money, and it usually takes things a lot longer to change. So if you're unsure, take my advice and choose the consular processing. I hope this gives you a very clear understanding, or at least a clearer understanding, of the differences between choosing consular processing to get your green card or choosing adjustment of status. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I promise I will get to them as soon as I can. And don't forget to like the video, don't forget to put subscribe, all those things, hit that bell, all that stuff. And don't forget to go to my social media and follow me on Instagram and Facebook so you can get more up-to-date information and also communicate with me more and get to know me a little bit better. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope you all out there have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and I hope to hear from you and see you very soon.